London, 1845. Bernard Quinley, the 7th Duke of Havenshire, stood rigid before the drawing-room window, his gloved hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at the falling snow. The December chill that permeated the glass couldn't compare to the coldness that had long settled in his heart. At 32, he had perfected the art of detachment from society, from emotion, and most certainly from the touch of others. "Your Grace," came the voice of his butler. "Lady Wiltmore's invitation has arrived for her Yuletide ball." Bernard didn't turn. "Decline it." "But Your Grace, this is the third invitation you've refused this month." "The ton is beginning to talk." "Let them," Bernard replied, his voice as hard as granite. "I have no interest in their frivolous gatherings or idle gossip." The truth, which Bernard would never admit aloud, was that the very thought of those crowded ballrooms, of simpering débutantes and their grasping mothers, of meaningless conversation and unwanted touch, made his skin crawl with revulsion. Since childhood, he had found human contact unbearable. His father, the previous duke, had beaten any show of sensitivity out of him, declaring that physical affection was weakness unbecoming of a Quinley heir. As Bernard grew, his natural aversion to touch had evolved into a strict code: no one touched the Duke of Havenshire. Not servants, not peers, and certainly not women. For years, Bernard had convinced himself that his isolation was a strength. Control was what mattered. Physical distance ensured emotional invulnerability. Love was merely a convenient fiction that weaker men used to justify their poor choices and inevitable downfall. "I need nothing and no one," he often told himself. Least of all a wife. Yet lately, in the dead of night when sleep eluded him, Bernard had begun to question whether his solitude was indeed strength or merely a prison of his own making. The vast, silent rooms of Havenshire House seemed emptier than ever, echoing with what he refused to acknowledge as loneliness. His daily routine was as predictable as the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall: estate business in the morning, fencing practice at 11, correspondence until luncheon, reading in the library through the afternoon, and a solitary dinner followed by brandy and more ledgers. He had cultivated the perfect, controlled existence. Until a letter arrived that shattered everything. "Your Grace," his butler announced the following morning, "a rather urgent correspondence from your solicitor, Mr. Finch." Bernard broke the seal and scanned the contents, his face darkening with each line. "It seems," he said finally, his voice dangerously calm, "that my cousin Edgar has managed to forge my signature on several substantial loans. He's amassed gambling debts of over £20,000 in my name." He crushed the letter in his fist. "And now the creditors are coming for Havenshire." Within the hour, Bernard was in his solicitor's office in London, his tall frame rigid with barely contained fury. There must be some legal recourse, he insisted. Mr. Finch, a small, nervous man with spectacles that kept sliding down his nose, shook his head. "I'm afraid the forgeries were quite skillful, Your Grace. And Lord Edgar has fled to the continent. The creditors have legal claim to foreclose on Havenshire unless the debts are paid within 30 days. Bernard's mind raced. Even with his considerable fortune, liquidating £20,000 of assets in a month would be ruinous. He would have to sell land that had been in the Quinley family for generations. "There is one potential solution," Mr. Finch ventured hesitantly. "Lady Garland's daughter has recently come into her inheritance." "Quite substantial, I understand." Bernard's jaw tightened. "You're suggesting I marry for money?" "I merely present options, Your Grace. Miss Garland is said to be accomplished and of good family. And—" the solicitor coughed delicately, "rumor has it she is in need of a titled husband to overcome certain, unfortunate circumstances." "What circumstances?" Bernard asked sharply. Mr. Finch lowered his voice. "A broken engagement last season. Quite scandalous. The gentleman in question publicly denounced her, claiming impropriety on her part. Nothing was proven, but her reputation has suffered." Bernard scoffed. "So I should wed a woman of questionable virtue to save my estate?" "Absolutely not." "As you wish, Your Grace. I shall begin preparations for the sale of the East properties." That evening, as Bernard sat alone in his study, the weight of his predicament pressed down on him. Havenshire had been the Quinley legacy for over 300 years. Could he really be the one to lose it? And over his cousin's treachery? A marriage of convenience was not uncommon among the aristocracy. A business arrangement, nothing more. He wouldn't need to touch the woman, they could lead separate lives after an heir was secured. The thought made his stomach turn. The very idea of physical intimacy, of allowing someone that close, made him recoil. Yet the alternative was unthinkable. Arrange a meeting with Lady Garland, he instructed his butler the next morning. I wish to discuss a matter of mutual benefit. 2 days later, Bernard found himself in the drawing room of a modest but elegant townhouse in Mayfair, awaiting Lady Garland and her daughter. The door opened, and he rose stiffly as a regal woman in her 50s entered, followed by a younger woman whose face was partially obscured by the brim of her bonnet. "Your Grace," Lady Garland curtsied. "May I present my daughter, Miss Nora Garland?" The young woman raised her head, and Bernard felt an unexpected jolt. Miss Garland was not what he had anticipated. Instead of the timid, shamed creature he had imagined, she stood with quiet dignity. Her eyes, a clear grey-green, met his without hesitation, not with the usual coquettish lowering of lashes he was accustomed to from young ladies, but with direct, honest appraisal. "Your Grace," she said, her voice low and melodious. "How unexpected to receive your call." There was something in her tone, a hint of irony, perhaps, that suggested she knew exactly why he had come. "Miss Garland," he replied with a formal bow. "I appreciate your receiving me on such short notice." Lady Garland excused herself to order tea, leaving them momentarily alone, a breach of propriety that confirmed his suspicion that this meeting had been anticipated and planned for. "Shall we dispense with pretense, Your Grace?" Nora asked once her mother had departed. "You're here because you need my fortune, and I'm here because I need your title. A tidy arrangement for us both, wouldn't you agree?" Bernard stiffened at her directness. "You presume much, Miss Garland." "Do I?" "Your estate is about to be foreclosed upon due to your cousin's treachery, and my reputation lies in tatters due to a rejected suitor's spite. We are both in untenable positions that could be resolved through a pragmatic alliance." For a moment, Bernard was speechless. Not only was she well informed about his circumstances, but she addressed them with a candor he found both unsettling and oddly refreshing. "You speak very frankly for a lady," he finally managed. A smile touched her lips. "I found that scandal has a way of stripping away meaningless social niceties. Besides, we haven't the luxury of time for extended courtship rituals, have we?" Bernard studied her more carefully. Nora Garland was not a conventional beauty, but there was something compelling about her features. Her auburn hair was swept back from a high forehead, her nose straight and her mouth generous. She held herself with a quiet confidence that belied her reportedly ruined status. "And what of these improprieties you were accused of?" he asked bluntly. "If I am to consider such an arrangement, I must know the truth of them." She didn't flinch at the question. "Lord Pembroke claimed I allowed liberties before our engagement was formalized. The truth is that I refused his advances, and when I discovered he had significant gambling debts he expected my inheritance to cover, I ended our understanding. He chose to ruin my reputation rather than admit the truth." Her direct gaze challenged him to disbelieve her. Bernard found, surprisingly, that he did not. "I require certain conditions in any marriage," he said stiffly. "I value my privacy and independence. I would expect the same courtesy extended to me would be extended to you, but our lives would remain largely separate." Something flickered in her eyes, disappointment, perhaps, but it was quickly masked. "I understand, Your Grace. I seek security and restoration of my standing, not romance. However," she added with sudden firmness, "I do want children. Heirs for your title and daughters I might love. On that point, I cannot compromise." Children. The word hung between them, heavy with implication. Bernard felt a cold sweat break out on his brow. The marriage bed. Physical intimacy. The thought made his chest tighten painfully. That would be unnecessary, of course," he managed to say. Nora tilted her head slightly, studying him with those perceptive eyes. "You dislike being touched," she observed quietly. "I've noticed how you maintain a precise distance, how you avoided shaking my mother's hand upon greeting." Bernard stiffened, feeling exposed in a way he hadn't in years. "My personal habits are not open for discussion." "If we are to be married, Your Grace, they very much are," she countered. "I don't ask for love or even affection, but I will not enter a union where I am made to feel that my very presence is repulsive." "It's not," Bernard stopped abruptly, uncharacteristically flustered. "It's not you specifically. It's everyone. I simply prefer not to be touched." To his surprise, Nora nodded thoughtfully. "I see. Well, that is something we can work with, I suppose. Physical boundaries can be respected." Her matter-of-fact acceptance, without prying or pity, caught Bernard off guard. For the first time in the conversation, he felt some of his tension ease. "Then we have an understanding?" he asked. "We have the beginning of one," she corrected. "I would like a fortnight to consider the particulars before giving my final answer. And I would expect to see you at least 3 times during that period so that we might become better acquainted." Bernard wanted to refuse. The logical part of him insisted this was merely a business transaction that could be concluded immediately. Yet something in her steady gaze made him nod in agreement. "Very well. I shall call again on Thursday." As he took his leave, Bernard was unsettled to realize that for the first time in years, he was actually anticipating a social engagement. Over the next 2 weeks, their meetings continued, each one challenging Bernard's carefully constructed worldview a little more. Nora was unlike any woman he had encountered in society. She spoke directly, listened intently, and seemed genuinely interested in his thoughts rather than simply agreeing with everything he said. During their 3rd meeting, as they walked through the quiet paths of a private garden, she asked him about Havenshire. "It's been in my family since the reign of Henry VIII, Bernard found himself explaining with unusual animation. The East Wing was added during Queen Elizabeth's time, and the formal gardens were designed by a student of capability Brown." "You love it very much," Nora observed. Bernard hesitated. "It is my heritage, my responsibility." "No," she said gently. "It's more than duty to you. I can hear it in your voice. Havenshire isn't just land and stone to you, it's home." The simple observation struck Bernard deeply. No one had ever noticed, or at least commented on, his deep attachment to his ancestral home. He had always presented his determination to save Havenshire as a matter of family obligation, not emotional connection. "Perhaps," he admitted reluctantly. "And what of you, Miss Garland? What do you love?" Her smile was wistful. "Books. Music. Truth. I love the quiet moments when the world seems to pause and reveal something genuine." She glanced at him. "Those moments are rare in society, where everything is performance and pretense." "You're very cynical for one so young," Bernard remarked. "I prefer the realistic. Scandal has a way of showing you who truly values you and who merely tolerates your presence for advantage." "And which am I?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. Nora's eyes met his. "I'm not entirely certain yet. But I think, Your Grace, that you may be the first person in a very long time who has actually seen me, rather than the rumors that surround me." Her words resonated with Bernard in a way he couldn't immediately define. Wasn't that precisely how he felt in society, never seen for himself, but only for his title, wealth, and the whispers about his eccentricities? By their 5th meeting, a peculiar sort of comfort had developed between them. Bernard found himself speaking of things he rarely discussed: his interest in agricultural improvements, his collection of ancient maps, his frustration with Parliament's indifference to the poor harvests affecting his tenants. Nora proved to be not only an attentive listener but also a thoughtful respondent, asking insightful questions and offering perspectives he hadn't considered. For the first time in his adult life, Bernard was experiencing the pleasure of true intellectual companionship. Yet he still maintained his physical distance, careful never to allow even the accidental brushing of hands or sleeves. If Nora noticed, she made no comment, respecting his unspoken boundaries with a consideration that both relieved and, oddly, disappointed him. On the eve of when she was to give her answer regarding their arrangement, disaster struck. Bernard was reviewing estate documents in his study when his butler entered with a newspaper. "Your Grace, I believe you should see this immediately." The headline of the Society column made Bernard's blood run cold. Duke of Havenshire to wed disgraced heiress. Sources reveal desperate financial straits forcing noble house to align with scandalized Miss G. He didn't need to read further. The article would undoubtedly contain just enough truth to be damaging, wrapped in innuendo and speculation. Whoever had leaked this information, likely one of the creditors, had effectively cornered him. Now, if Nora refused him, his financial troubles would be public knowledge, and her reputation would suffer yet another blow. Without pausing to consider the impropriety, Bernard ordered his carriage and set out immediately for the Garland residence. It was nearly evening, and his unannounced call would certainly raise eyebrows, but the situation couldn't wait. He found Nora alone in the small library, her mother having retired early with a headache, likely brought on by the same newspaper article. "Your Grace," she said, rising in surprise. Her face was pale, her usual composure strained. "I didn't expect, you've seen it, then," he interrupted, holding up the newspaper. "Yes." She sighed heavily. "It seems our private negotiations are now very public indeed." Bernard paced the small room, his agitation evident. "This changes everything. If you reject me now, both our positions become untenable. You'll be seen as twice jilted, and I'll be exposed as a financial failure. We're being manipulated into this marriage." Nora watched him, her expression thoughtful. "Does it change your offer?" He stopped pacing. "No. My circumstances remain the same. But it does remove your freedom to choose, and for that, I am sincerely sorry." To his surprise, a small smile touched her lips. "Perhaps it's for the best." "What do you mean?" "I was going to accept your offer tomorrow," she admitted. "But I confess I've been wrestling with doubts, not about the arrangement itself, but about whether it could ever become something more than a mere transaction." Bernard felt an unexpected tightening in his chest. "More?" "Yes." She met his gaze steadily. "These past 2 weeks, I've come to respect you greatly, Your Grace. Your intelligence, your principles, your devotion to your responsibilities. In different circumstances, I might have hoped that respect could grow into deeper feelings over time." Her honesty left him momentarily speechless. The idea that she might want genuine affection from him, that she might see him as more than a title and a means to restored respectability, had never occurred to him. "I don't know if I'm capable of that," he said finally, the admission costing him more than he expected. "What you describe, emotional intimacy, it's not something I've ever—" "I know," she said gently. "But neither am I asking for it as a condition. I merely wish to be honest about my own thoughts before we finalize our understanding." Bernard found himself moved by her candor and dignity. "Then let us proceed. We should marry quickly, before more gossip can circulate." "A special license?" Nora suggested. "We could be wed within the week." "Yes." "And then to Havenshire, away from London society's prying eyes." She nodded, though he detected a flicker of uncertainty in her expression. "As you wish." As he prepared to take his leave, a sudden impulse seized Bernard. He reached for her hand, the first time he had voluntarily touched another person in years. The contact was brief, merely his gloved hand clasping her equally gloved one, but it sent an unexpected jolt through him, not the revulsion he had anticipated, but something almost like recognition. "Until tomorrow, Miss Garland," he said, releasing her hand quickly. "Until tomorrow," she echoed, her eyes wide with surprise at his gesture. As his carriage rolled through the darkened London streets, Bernard found himself staring at his gloved hand, still feeling the phantom pressure of Nora's fingers against his. They were married 3 days later in a private ceremony attended only by Lady Garland, Bernard's solicitor, and the parish clergyman. Nora wore a simple gown of pale blue silk, her auburn hair adorned with a single strand of pearls, her mother's wedding gift. Bernard, severe in black, stood rigidly as they exchanged vows, his responses clear but emotionless. The journey to Havenshire took 2 days, during which they travelled in near silence. Bernard buried himself in correspondence and estate papers, while Nora alternated between reading and gazing out the carriage window at the changing landscape. The few conversations they shared were polite but distant, as if the candour they had briefly achieved in London had been left behind with the city. When they finally arrived at Havenshire, Bernard watched Nora's face carefully as she took in the sprawling Tudor mansion with its mullioned windows and imposing stone facade. "It's magnificent," she breathed, her eyes wide with genuine appreciation. "So much history in every stone." "It's drafty in winter and requires constant maintenance," he replied pragmatically, though her evident admiration pleased him more than he cared to admit. The household staff lined up to greet their new duchess, their curious gazes barely disguised behind proper deference. Bernard had sent word ahead, of course, but the suddenness of his marriage had undoubtedly sparked speculation below stairs. Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper who had served at Havenshire since Bernard was a boy, stepped forward with a curtsy. "Welcome to Havenshire, Your Grace. Your rooms are prepared, and refreshments await in the blue drawing room." "Thank you, Mrs. Winters," Nora replied with a warm smile. "I look forward to becoming acquainted with the household once I've had a chance to rest from our journey." Her gracious response seemed to reassure the staff, several of whom exchanged approving glances. Bernard felt an unexpected surge of relief. Havenshire's servants were fiercely loyal, and their acceptance of Nora would make the transition smoother for everyone. As promised, Bernard had arranged for Nora to have her own suite of rooms adjacent to his, with connecting doors that he assumed would remain closed except for those necessary occasions when an heir must be conceived. The thought still filled him with dread, though he had resigned himself to the inevitability of it. For the first week at Havenshire, they established a polite routine. Breakfast taken separately, a brief meeting in the morning to discuss household matters, luncheon sometimes together in the small dining room, afternoons to their separate pursuits, and dinner in the formal dining room, followed by an hour of conversation in the library before retiring. It was during these evening hours that Bernard began to recognize how much he had come to value Nora's company. She was well-read and thoughtful, with opinions on everything from politics to poetry, yet she never pressed when he preferred silence. She seemed to intuitively understand his moods, backing away from topics that made him tense and gently encouraging his rare moments of animation. One evening, as they sat before the library fire, Nora broached a subject they had both been avoiding. "The staff have been asking about plans for the Christmas season," she said carefully. "Apparently, Havenshire traditionally hosted a Yuletide gathering for the local gentry." Bernard stiffened. "Not in recent years." "But it was a tradition," she persisted gently. "Mrs. Winters mentioned that your mother particularly enjoyed decorating the Great Hall with evergreens and hosting the tenants' children for gifts on Christmas Eve." The mention of his mother sent a sharp pain through Bernard's chest. Those memories belonged to a different time, before grief and his father's cruelty had hardened him. "Those traditions died with her," he said flatly. Nora was quiet for a moment, studying him with those perceptive eyes. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said finally. "She must have been a remarkable woman." "She was." The words escaped before he could stop them. "She made Havenshire a home, not just an estate." He hesitated, then added, "She was the only person who ever." He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "The only person who touched you without causing distress." Nora finished softly. Bernard looked up sharply. "How did you?" "I observe," she said simply. "And I've come to care about understanding you." The admission hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. For the first time, Bernard felt a strong impulse to share the truth he had never spoken aloud. "After she died, my father became cruel. He believed that my sensitivity, my discomfort with physical contact, was unmanly. Weakness unbecoming of a Quinley. He was determined to beat it out of me." Bernard's voice had become distant, as if he were reciting someone else's history. "The more he forced contact, his hand, his cane, being made to shake hands with visitors even when it made me physically ill, the more I came to associate touch with pain and humiliation. Nora's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but her voice remained steady. "And so you built walls to protect yourself?" "Yes. By the time I became Duke at 23, I had perfected the art of ensuring no one ever came close enough to touch me, physically or otherwise." "Until now," Nora said quietly. Their eyes met across the space between their chairs, and Bernard felt something shift inside him, a hairline crack in the fortress he had built around himself. "Until now," he agreed softly. The next morning, Bernard woke to find a small package outside his chamber door. Inside was a pair of finely made leather gloves and a note in Nora's elegant script, for when you might wish for contact without discomfort. No obligation, simply an option. The thoughtfulness of the gesture, acknowledging his aversion while offering a potential bridge, moved him deeply. It was neither a demand nor a dismissal of his feelings, but a gentle invitation to possibility. That evening, he wore the gloves to dinner. Nora noticed immediately, her eyes brightening, but she made no comment. It was only later, as they walked to the library together, that she hesitantly extended her own gloved hand. Bernard stared at it for a long moment, his heart pounding. Then, with deliberate care, he took her hand in his. Through the double barrier of their gloves, the contact was bearable, more than bearable. It was, he realized with surprise, comforting. They walked the rest of the way hand in hand, neither speaking of this momentous development. But something had undeniably changed between them. Over the next weeks, as Christmas approached, Bernard found himself yielding more and more to Nora's gentle influence. First, it was agreeing to have the great hall decorated with evergreens. Then, allowing the cook to prepare traditional Yuletide foods that hadn't been served at Havenshire in years. Finally, most surprisingly to the staff, he approved Nora's suggestion to invite the tenants' children for gifts on Christmas Eve. Not a grand affair, she assured him when he hesitated. Just the families who work the estate, for an hour or two in the afternoon. Hot cider, gingerbread, and small gifts for the children. It would mean so much to them, and to the staff who remember happier Christmases here. Looking at her hopeful expression, Bernard found he couldn't refuse. "As you wish," he said, and was rewarded with a smile that warmed him more than the library fire. The children's visit proved less ordeal and more pleasure than Bernard had anticipated. Watching Nora with the tenant families, kneeling to speak with shy children, listening attentively to farmers' wives, remembering every name, he felt a strange ache in his chest. This was what Havenshire had lacked since his mother's death, the human touch that transformed a grand house into a home where people felt valued. As the last family departed, cheeks rosy from cider and arms laden with gifts, Bernard found himself standing beside Nora in the great hall, suddenly acutely aware of her presence. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You were right. This was needed." Nora turned to him, snowflakes still melting in her hair from having walked the families to the door. "Did you enjoy it, even a little?" "I did," he admitted, surprising himself with the realization. "Particularly watching you with them. You have a gift for making people feel seen." "As do you, when you allow yourself," she replied. "I noticed how you remembered Mr. Tilney's concerns about the Northfield drainage, and how you asked after Mrs. Collins's mother's health. You care more than you let yourself show." Bernard was silent, struck by her perception. It was true that he had always taken his responsibilities to his tenants seriously, but he had maintained a careful distance, handling their concerns through his steward whenever possible. "Perhaps," he said finally, "I have been too removed from the people who depend on Havenshire. My father believed that familiarity bred contempt, that a duke must maintain distance to command respect." "And what do you believe?" Nora asked gently. Bernard looked at her, really looked at her, standing in the hall his ancestors had built, bringing life back to its ancient stones. In that moment, he realized that the walls he had built around himself had not only kept pain out but had also kept everything else at bay: connection, joy, purpose beyond mere duty. "I believe," he said slowly, "that I have been wrong about many things." That night, as they sat before the fire in the library, Bernard found himself studying Nora's profile, illuminated by the flickering flames. The companionable silence between them was no longer awkward but comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. I received word today that my funds have cleared the last of the debts, he said at last. Havenshire is secure. Nora turned to him with a genuine smile. I'm so glad. I know what this place means to you. Yes. Bernard hesitated, then continued, which means that our arrangement has fulfilled its primary purpose. Her smile faded slightly. I see. And does that change things between us? It was the question that had been haunting Bernard for days. Their marriage of convenience had secured both their positions, his estate was saved, and her social standing restored. By the terms of their original understanding, they had accomplished what they set out to do. But something had shifted in him, something he couldn't quite define. I don't know, he admitted. I find that I'm less certain of what I want than I was before. Nora's eyes searched his face. And what do you want, Bernard? It was the first time she had used his given name, and the sound of it on her lips sent an unexpected warmth through him. I think, he said carefully, that I want to discover what this marriage could become if it were more than a practical arrangement. The hope that bloomed in her eyes made his heart beat faster. I would like that very much, she whispered. Tentatively, Bernard reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand in his, this time, without gloves. Her skin was warm and soft against his, and though he felt the familiar initial discomfort at the contact, it quickly gave way to something else, connection. Nora's fingers curled gently around his, neither demanding nor retreating. At your pace, she said softly. Always at your pace. Bernard nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in his throat. For the first time in his adult life, he was choosing to reach beyond his carefully constructed boundaries, and Nora was meeting him there with patience and understanding. As they sat hand in hand before the fire, Bernard realized that his world had already changed irrevocably. The fortress he had built around himself hadn't collapsed all at once but had been gently, persistently undermined by Nora's quiet strength and compassion until he found himself wanting to step beyond its walls. That night marked the beginning of a gradual transformation. Over the following weeks, Bernard allowed himself small, incremental steps toward physical closeness with Nora. A hand on her elbow as they walked in the garden. Standing close enough that their shoulders occasionally brushed while examining a book together. Each contact became less jarring, more natural, until he found himself actively seeking these brief connections. By the time spring began to soften Havenshire's grounds, Bernard had grown comfortable offering Nora his arm when they walked together, and she had learned exactly when to accept and when to give him space. Their evenings in the library had become the highlight of his days, filled with meaningful conversation and increasingly comfortable silences. Yet there remained between them the unaddressed matter of true marital intimacy. Bernard knew that Nora desired children, as she had stated from the beginning, but he had been unable to bring himself to cross that final threshold. The thought still filled him with anxiety, not because he found Nora unappealing, quite the opposite, but because such vulnerability seemed insurmountable. As April turned to May, Bernard noticed a subtle change in Nora. A certain wistfulness had entered her eyes when she looked at him, quickly masked when she realized he was watching. She never pressed him, never made demands, but he sensed her growing longing for a deeper connection. One evening, as they sat in the library discussing plans for improving the tenant cottages, a letter arrived from London. Nora broke the seal and scanned its contents, her expression growing troubled. Is something wrong? Bernard asked. It's from my mother, she replied. She writes that Lady Pembroke has been spreading rumours in London that our marriage is a sham, that you can barely stand to be in the same room with me, and that I have failed to secure an heir because you find me repulsive. Bernard felt a surge of anger. Malicious nonsense. Lady Pembroke is simply defending her son's reputation by attempting to validate his earlier claims about you. Perhaps, Nora said, her voice carefully neutral. But such rumours can be damaging if left unchecked. Mother suggests we make an appearance in London for the remainder of the season, to silence the gossip. The thought of returning to London, of enduring the scrutiny and whispers of the ton, made Bernard's jaw clench. Yet he could see the hurt behind Nora's composed expression. She had endured scandal once before, and now, because of his limitations, she was facing it again. Would you like to go? He asked quietly. Nora hesitated. I don't particularly enjoy London society. But I also don't want these rumors to persist, for both our sakes. Bernard studied her face, seeing the loyalty and consideration that had become so characteristic of her. She was willing to endure his physical reticence indefinitely, to defend their unusual marriage to society, to build a life within the constraints he imposed, all without complaint. And in that moment, he knew he could not continue to deny her the full marriage she deserved. We'll go to London, he decided. But not because of Lady Pembroke's spiteful gossip. We'll go because it's time we truly began our life together, without hiding behind these walls or my limitations. Nora's eyes widened. Bernard, what are you saying? He moved to kneel before her chair, taking both her hands in his. The contact no longer caused him distress, instead, it grounded him, gave him courage. I'm saying that I've been a coward, he admitted. Not because I fear touch, that is a real response I cannot simply wish away. But because I've used that fear to avoid the greater risk of truly opening my heart to you. Tears shimmered in Nora's eyes. You don't have to, I do, he interrupted gently. Because I love you, Nora. I love your kindness, your intelligence, your quiet strength. I love how you've brought Havenshire back to life. I love how you understand me without words. And I choose, to overcome my fears to build a true marriage with you. A tear slipped down Nora's cheek. I love you too, she whispered. I have for months now. Bernard reached up, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, and brushed the tear from her face. The sensation of his bare fingers against her soft skin sent a shiver through him, not of revulsion, but of wonder. It will still take time, he cautioned. I can't promise that everything will be easy. I don't need easy, Nora replied, turning her face to press a gentle kiss against his palm. I just need you, exactly as you are, moving forward together. That evening marked another beginning. Bernard asked Nora to help him move her belongings into his chambers, not with expectations for that night, but as a symbol of his commitment to their future. They worked together, rearranging the room to accommodate her dressing table and favorite books, creating a shared space that felt, for the first time in Bernard's life, like a sanctuary rather than a solitary retreat. When they finally retired, Bernard felt an unfamiliar mixture of nervousness and anticipation. Nora, perceptive as always, suggested they simply lie together, talking in the darkness until sleep came. And so they did, side by side beneath the covers, their hands clasped between them as they spoke of small, ordinary things, the gardens they would plant, the books they wished to read together, their hopes for Havenshire's future. Gradually, Bernard's tension eased, and he found himself drawing closer, until Nora's head rested against his shoulder and his arm curved around her waist. The intimacy of the moment, the warmth of her body against his, the scent of her hair, the steady rhythm of her breathing, overwhelmed him not with panic but with profound gratitude. This woman had patiently waited for him to find his way through his fears, never pushing, always understanding. Nora, he whispered into the darkness. She murmured sleepily. Thank you for not giving up on me. She tilted her face up to his. I never will. In that promise, Bernard found the courage to lower his head and press his lips to hers, their first kiss. It was gentle, hesitant, a bridge crossing years of isolation into a future he had never believed possible for himself. When they arrived in London 3 weeks later for the height of the season, the town was abuzz with curiosity about the reclusive Duke of Havenshire and his new Duchess. Their entrance at Lady Harrington's ball caused a momentary lull in conversation as all eyes turned to assess them. Bernard felt the familiar tightness in his chest at being the center of such scrutiny. But then he felt Nora's hand on his arm, steady and reassuring, and he drew strength from her presence beside him. They moved through the ballroom with dignified grace, greeting acquaintances with polite warmth. Bernard noticed the speculative glances, heard the whispers behind fans. He knew what they were saying, wondering if the rumors were true, if his marriage was indeed the loveless arrangement for convenience it had begun as. Across the room, he spotted Lady Pembroke watching them with narrow-eyed calculation. Beside her stood her son, Lord Pembroke, the man who had slandered Nora and nearly destroyed her reputation. Without hesitation, Bernard guided Nora directly toward them. "Lady Pembroke, Lord Pembroke," he acknowledged with cool civility. "I trust you are well this season." Lady Pembroke's smile was thin. "Your Grace, we had not expected to see you in London. You so rarely grace society with your presence." "Indeed," Bernard replied. "But I found I could not bear to be parted from my Duchess even for a few weeks. London's charms pale in comparison to hers, but she graciously agreed to accompany me for business matters." He turned to Nora, and in a gesture that would be remarked upon in every drawing-room in London by morning, he raised her gloved hand to his lips. "My dear, I believe they're preparing for the next set. Would you honor me with this dance?" Shock registered briefly in Lady Pembroke's eyes. Everyone in society knew that the Duke of Havenshire never danced, never engaged in such public displays of affection. Nora's eyes met his, understanding the significance of his request. "I would be delighted, Your Grace." As Bernard led Nora onto the dance floor, he felt dozens of curious gazes following them. The orchestra struck up a waltz, and he drew her into his arms with a confidence that belied his racing heart. "Are you certain about this?" Nora asked softly as they began to move with the music. "Entirely," he assured her, though his palms were damp within his gloves. "Let them see the truth of us, not the fiction they've invented." As they swept around the ballroom, Bernard gradually forgot the watching eyes. His world narrowed to Nora's face, to the trust and love shining in her eyes, to the perfect rhythm they had found together, not just in this dance, but in their life at Havenshire. By the time the music ended, the whispers had already changed tenor. No one watching could doubt that the Duke of Havenshire was a man deeply in love with his wife. Later that evening, as they prepared to depart, they encountered Lord Pembroke alone near the entrance hall. He bowed stiffly, his expression sullen. "Your Grace, Duchess," he acknowledged. "I see congratulations are in order." "Indeed they are," Bernard replied coolly. "Though I believe you owe my wife an apology for your previous slander against her character." Lord Pembroke flushed darkly. "I merely reported what I believed to be true at the time." "What you invented because your pride was wounded," Bernard corrected, his voice dangerously quiet. "And in doing so, you very nearly destroyed the reputation of the most honorable woman I have ever known." Nora placed a gentle hand on Bernard's arm. "It's all right," she said. "The truth has a way of revealing itself in time." Her dignity in that moment, her refusal to demand the apology she deserved, only confirmed to Bernard how fortunate he was to have her as his Duchess. As they rode home in their carriage, Bernard drew Nora close against his side, no longer constrained by the boundaries that had once defined his existence. "You were magnificent tonight," he told her. "Every person in that ballroom could see what I have come to know, that I am the most fortunate of men to call you my wife." Nora smiled up at him, her face illuminated by the passing street lamps. "And I am equally fortunate. Though I admit I'm eager to return to Havenshire. London has too many people and too much noise." Bernard laughed softly. "We've become a perfect pair of recluses, haven't we? Happiest in our own company at home." "Home," Nora repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, that's what Havenshire has become for me. Not because of its grandeur or history, but because you're there." Bernard tightened his arm around her, marveling at how natural it now felt to hold her close. "We'll return at the end of the week. We've made our point, I think. No one who saw us tonight will believe Lady Pembroke's malicious rumors." "No," Nora agreed with a small, secret smile. "Especially not in a few months' time, when they learn that Havenshire will soon have an heir." Bernard froze, his heart suddenly pounding. "Nora, are you saying?" She nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears of joy. "The physician confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to wait for the perfect moment to tell you." For a moment, Bernard couldn't speak past the emotion constricting his throat. Then he gathered her fully into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, which, he realized, she was. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "For believing that I could change. For your patience. For showing me that the very thing I feared most, human touch, could become my greatest joy." Nora raised her face to his. Love doesn't demand perfection, Bernard. It only asks for honesty and the courage to grow together. As their carriage rolled through the London night, Bernard Quinley, the Duke of Havenshire, once known as the most untouchable man in England, held his Duchess in his arms and marvelled at how completely one woman's gentle persistence had melted the frozen fortress around his heart. And in that quiet moment of perfect understanding, he knew that the walls he had built to protect himself had finally, mercifully, crumbled away, replaced by the stronger, more resilient bonds of love.